We're commanded to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. For these last several weeks, that's taken on new importance. I hope you're doing so right now. Stay tuned. This last year has been very challenging to people all around the world, with the COVID pandemic, with economic downturns, with political challenges roiling America and other nations. But can you imagine being under daily attack, with rockets raining down, having no idea where they're going to land? That's what the people of Israel have been experiencing now for several days, and it's appropriate that we here at Lamb Lion Ministries comment on that, because we have a heart for Israel and for the Jewish people. Some people have the misguided understanding that this is a war between two sides who are on moral equivalency. Nothing could be further from the truth. The terrorists who reign in Gaza, Hamas, have declared that they are determined to annihilate Israel and kill as many Jews as possible. Even when the West invests money and sends them millions of dollars of support, they divert it into either lining their own pockets or creating tunnels and creating weapons to attack Israel. Why? Because of a satanic hatred for Israel. When Israel responds with appropriate degrees of defensive measures or attacks the very militants who are killing Jews, the world cries outrage. And even here in the United States, there are some very misguided leaders who have thrown their support behind Hamas instead of standing together with Israel. Let me be very clear. We stand with Israel. We pray for the peace of Jerusalem, knowing that peace will not reign in Jerusalem until the Prince of Peace comes to reign on the throne of his father David. But we also realize that all the political posturing and propaganda aside, Israel has every right to defend itself. Some misguided people will actually claim that this latest round of violence is Israel's fault, because they say, well, Israel has evicted a number of Palestinians in East Jerusalem. The fact of the matter is that there have been a handful of families, 4 to be specific, that were living on land that was owned by Jewish people back in the Ottoman Empire. When Jordan claimed East Jerusalem and the West Bank as its territory following 1948, it evicted those Jewish homeowners and allowed Palestinians to live on that land without actually transferring title. Well, when Israel came back in possession of Jerusalem and the Old City in 1967, they decided that they would allow those Jewish people who had rightful legal claims on land to return to their homes. And that's exactly what they did. Well, there was a legal battle between these 4 families, Palestinian, and the rightful owners who were Jewish. And so after many, many years of legal wrangling, the Israeli court system, through a judicial process, awarded custody of that property to the Jewish owners. Well, Hamas seized upon this as a way to demonstrate its own solidarity with Palestinian people living in Judea and Samaria and in East Jerusalem, and used that as an excuse to begin attacking Israel. That is absolutely ridiculous. The United States would not tolerate rockets being hurled into Texas from Mexico or into Seattle from Canada. No nation would tolerate rockets being launched on its citizens, specifically targeting civilians. And Israel has responded by targeting militants. Even when it destroys buildings, it calls ahead to the people in those buildings and says, you need to leave now because we're going to destroy this building, being used as a headquarters for Hamas or in the manufacture of weapons or as a launching site. And that is exactly what has happened. So once again, folks, we need to pray for the peace of Israel and for Jerusalem. We need to pray for the Jewish people. We also should pray for the Palestinian people, so many of whom are being deceived by their own leaders. They're leaders who are bent on satanic hatred for Jewish people. We need to pray for all those who are suffering as victims of this violence, but realize that the violence has been initiated and is being perpetuated by those whose determined end is the destruction of Israel and the murder of Jewish people. And we need to call out our own so-called leaders here in the United States who are trying to give support for Hamas and other terrorist organizations, even giving money, most recently, to the Palestinians and trying to create a deal with Iran to provide more money, which will flow to the Hamas terrorists in Israel and the Hezbollah terrorists in Lebanon. Pray earnestly for the peace of Jerusalem, and know that soon and very soon our Prince of Peace will come. Godspeed.